Yes. Yes, are you sure? Okay. All right, we're ready. Good morning, New York, where William Richards is coming from. Good afternoon, London, where Sir John is coming from, outside of London, I think, but I would say London for now. John Scarlett.
London
itself, great. And good afternoon to Mina Al-Oraibi from Abu Dhabi, and to Amira Yahyaoui, she's now in Tunis. So we are going to have our 23rd e-policy circle of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. The conversation is always free and inspiring and challenging, and I will expect no less from this fantastic group who have given me the honor to join me today. And we will do, as usual, the 4 minutes to each of the speakers, then we engage in a conversation, and then we will conclude in 1 hour exactly. So I'm going to start with Sir John Scarlett. 4 minutes to you, Sir John.
Right, thank you, Raghida. Now, I am going to be starting off with some quick commentary on geopolitics in a broad way. And that maybe will set the context for everybody else's comments. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the context is really set by the following issues. The return of great power rivalry, which has been a much discussed development over the last 2 or 3 years. Of course, the pandemic and the continuing impact of the pandemic, which is a huge issue. And then the elections in the United States and the election of Joe Biden, who is now, of course, president-elect. Now, it's the natural tendency for a professional intelligence officer, which I'm not anymore, but I was for many years, to think about, well, how are other people and how are major players, in this case, competitors and other countries, particularly for the United States, are thinking and thinking about all this, about this context, and what are they expecting to happen? What are they looking for? So I'm going to start like that, and then there'll be some final comments. First of all, obviously, I'm going to be thinking about the reaction and basically it's in the context that I set out, but it's the reaction to the election of Joe Biden. How is this? How are people reacting to this in China? How does that look from Beijing? Of course, this is speculative, and I'm trying to get into the mind of somebody else on the other side here. But the way I see it so far is that to some extent, there's a positive reaction to the election of Joe Biden, because he will be seen as someone who is more predictable, more realistic in his behavior and his expectations and his understanding of what China may or may not prepared to do. But that will be coupled with a concern about the fact that he will very probably continue to be tough on the main issues of potential contention between the United States and its allies, but particularly the United States, geopolitical issues around Taiwan, the South China Sea, the complications of North Korea and so on. But also, he will be much more focused than President Trump has been on domestic or sort of tension issues, human rights issues, and of course, what has been happening in Hong Kong. And he will be much more focused on working together with allies in East Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Of course, that is, there's some pretty big countries involved in that. That's Japan, that's India, that's Australia, some serious places. It's, I said realistic. I think the expectation will be, and there's quite a lot of evidence for this, but it can be debated, that there is a realization in the Joe Biden camp that the idea that it's possible for the United States to decouple in some way economically and sort of socially almost from China, which has become and is the other superpower when enormous interdependence and interlocking action between their economies, it isn't a realistic way forward. And of course, that's become more complicated, if you like, with the growth of free trade arrangements, including very particularly in the RCEP in East Asia and South Pacific. So there's going to have to be a reality check there for the Biden administration and trying to define a way forward. And I think there's a growing understanding that everybody's going to be trying to look at that and work on it in spite of all the tensions. But I'm not trying to be optimistic. I'm just trying to be realistic. And who knows quite what will happen. Now in Russia, there is a rather similar reaction. Yes, a predictable person, so they feel happier with it. And of course, the things they want to do together, but also being worried about being tough on Russia. I'll move quickly. That's very interesting. Russia's got a lot of problems at the moment. In Europe, a big welcome for what has happened with the election, but of course, uncertainty about the United States as a result of President Biden, President Trump. And so that's we'll have to see how that works out. The Europeans are going to have to be serious about responding to American demands, particularly in the area of defense. And then finally, I'm going to touch on, inevitably, but we can discuss it much more, the big issues in the Middle East and North Africa. Everybody's talking about Iran at the moment, day by day by day, and that's going to be really testing. But also we have the Abraham Accords. There's going to be a big focus of attention for the Biden administration, what happens in the Middle East. But whatever else we know, we know that the behavior will be different. Thank you.
Yeah, John Scarlett, I'm going to come back to you on several of these points, particularly China and the issue of human rights in Hong Kong, because I'm not so sure how the Biden administration is going to square that with what it wishes to do with China. But we will get into discussing that when everyone is done with their 4 minutes. I will go now to Mina Al-Oraibi. Please, Mina, 4 minutes to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Raghida. Thank you for having me for this discussion. You know, what a year it's been for all of us with COVID-19, but also this is a year of anniversaries really in the region. I'm a historian by university education before I became journalist. So, you know, this is 40 years since the Iran-Iraq war that in some ways feels like it's ongoing in a different way. 30 years since the Kuwait invasion and the real shakeup in the Gulf. Importantly, 10 years since the uprising in Tunisia and everything that followed in the Arab world. It's hard to believe a decade has passed. And importantly, all of these events continue to play out in the region, while, of course, big developments happen globally and the United States engagement with the region, particularly, even though I'm sitting in Abu Dhabi, thinking as an Iraqi, how much that American relationship has influenced Iraq in the region. This year started dramatically with the drone strike that took out Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and also Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was a key militia leader. And so really this year, now as we draw towards the end of it with a new president expected in the White House, it's been quite turbulent, to say the least. For Iraq, we are at a point where we're hearing that the American administration wants to pull out more troops, but not fully pull out. So there should still be 2,500 troops. And unfortunately, in the region, what we've learned when it comes to the United States, military presence means political engagement. When there's no military presence, that political engagement drops. And of course, I won't talk about all of the countries of the region, but Syria and Lebanon, hugely important, what a Biden administration will mean for the relationship with Iran, but also the knock-on effects in the rest of the region, particularly Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. Of course, here in the Gulf, and particularly in the UAE, it's been a different type of year. I think very few people will remember, seeing of all the events that happened, that a Mars probe was sponsored and supported and developed by the UAE, and they were able to launch from Japan despite the pandemic. There have been major changes in the laws here for family laws that really have promoted certain freedoms. But also, of course, the Abraham Accords, which is what internationally people have paid more attention to. But it's part of this wider changing of mindsets that we're seeing in the UAE and in different parts of the Gulf that could have a longer positive impact in changing the dynamics that are happening in the region. However, all of that, of course, will be determined by other actors in the region. So the Biden administration, Biden undoubtedly has an Obama legacy. The vice president at the time played a big role, especially in Iraq, but in other parts of the region. He also has a Senate's legacy. People remember his positions when he was on the Foreign Relations or Foreign Affairs Committee. And so people are expecting interesting things from him. They know he's more engaged than other perhaps candidates with the region and already has his opinions formed. Hopefully some of those will be enlightened and that he'll realize the region today is very much changed since the 4 years since he was last in office. So I'll leave that just for introductory remarks, Raghida, and looking forward to the conversation.
Me too, me too. I'm looking forward to going through several of the important points that you've made that I would like to take further during the conversation. Amira Yahyaoui, 4 minutes to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Raghida, and thanks to everyone for being here. When I read the theme of this policy, which is stability and the authors of the future, I was wondering who are the authors of the future in this world where resistance became sitting in your couch and watching Netflix, where being a responsible citizen is to do nothing, where like just the world has changed in a year and everyone gets used to something new. And then, as you know, maybe the big news today is the election in the US. And as you know, right, I'm based out of San Francisco usually. And I remember the day of the election looking at Trump's tweets, which is his number one, like media to talk to people, which was like talking directly to people. His tweets were all hidden. And so today what's going on is the power is shifting and the future is written by other people. The president of the United States cannot talk directly to people because some people in Silicon Valley can decide if his whatever he wants to say is worth it or not and should be addressed and should be read or not. And that in few days impacted everyone, not only social media, but also the media, the regular media. And so never before ever, Fox News will interrupt the president's speech to correct it. And that happened, and this is an event that never happened before. What's going on when we look at the election of Biden? Who voted for him? Could Biden have won if he didn't pick a female Black VP? When you look who made the shift to Biden, it was his Black women. When you see what is the thing that made people go out in the streets in America was the Black Lives Matter movement. And that Black Lives Matter movement has actually been everywhere. You've seen it in the UK, we've seen it in France, we've seen it even in Tunisia, we've seen it everywhere. And what I think is that power is sliding out of power, which is government and elected officials. And not only it's sliding out as it has been in Tunisia during the Arab Spring, etc., but today what's going on is that the misfits, the anti-status quo, those people, the nerds who build the media we are using today are getting inside power too. Look at Congress, the Squad, the AUCs, etc., who won their seats hands on, right? It was super easy for them to get reelected. Today, for example, Cori Bush got elected, who's one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And she is very young. And those are like, they are not only active from the outside, but they are getting inside. So what will be interesting for me to see in the coming 4 years is basically the revenge of the misfits and the importance of listening and taking them into consideration. Because it's not a demand, they actually hold power. We are using Zoom for this meeting. Zoom is built by Eric Yuan, who is a Chinese immigrant engineer. When he started Zoom, it was not to prepare for UN resolutions meetings. Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, he did not create Twitter so that the president of the United States and the president-elect announce their election and debate world policies. So what I am looking forward to discuss is, who are those real authors of the future and how will they write that future differently from the ones who are writing it today?
And how scary is what you just said, if it is those people who are going to author the future, which I'm sure William Richards has something to say about, maybe after he does his 4 minutes. I've got such rich material that I can't wait till I just get in. Please, William Richards, 4 minutes to you, and then we are going to discuss a lot of what has been spoken.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And what a pleasure to be here with all of you and all of you around the world. I wanted to speak a bit because I spent 42 years of my life on Wall Street. I wanted to speak a bit about the future and what I think lies ahead for the financial markets around the world. And ironically, if you're an investor, uncertainty is your friend and really certainty is your enemy. Uncertainty creates massive opportunity. And since March of 2020, I don't think I've ever seen as much uncertainty as I've seen here in the US because of the COVID virus. And suddenly I spent my life when I was on Wall Street searching for inflection points. And let me just talk about one that happened, I think, in 1983. That was the initial public offering of Microsoft. And what an inflection point that was for technology and technology investing in the years ahead. Fortunes were created. We're in an extremely unusual moment right now because we have two huge inflection points. I just heard Jamie Dimon 20 minutes ago, the CEO of JP Morgan, say, thank God for the vaccines. Well, we've got 2 vaccines and more coming. That's a huge inflection point. And then Sir John and the others spoke a bit about this. We have a president-elect, and on January 20th, we'll have a new presidency here in the US. That's a huge inflection point. You combine both of them, and for me, in my 74 years, I've never seen anything like this before. And I just want to mention in closing a bit about narrow elections. I have huge respect for the historian John Meacham. I heard him on television last week say that the closest elections in US presidential elections have produced the greatest presidents. So for me, I am hugely optimistic. I think whether you're in venture investing or you're investing in global stock markets, this is a tremendous time, and there's a lot of noise that's disguising what's really going on. And thank you for giving me a moment to share these thoughts with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, William Richards. Stay with me because I want you to kindly think about what Amira Yahyaoui just told us and to tell me what you thought about her theories, about the misfits and about who's going to be running the world. And how does that square with your very wonderfully optimistic note? And then I want Amira to respond to what you said, because I'm going to stay with the financials and the economy, at least on the level of Wall Street and investment and Silicon Valley. So please, you go ahead, and then I want to go back to Amira. William
Well,
Richard.
I'm a bit of a misfit, so I'm very comfortable with the misfits, but I will say, I think we will all find that Joe Biden will be an inclusive president. And I think that will surprise a lot of people. I think he will also include Republicans. And I think a lot of Americans have been very unhappy the last 4 years. And I think starting on January 20th, most of them are going to be much happier. And we're going to be a better nation in my mind.
Amira, do you want to say something in regards to the optimism and the encouragement for good investment, good opportunity, point of inflection, nothing like it? You know, this is the stuff you know. Can you tell us if you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, I am personally very optimistic because when I say, when I say that the misfits or underdogs are actually the new leaders of today, it's not only about like technologies, also the Gretas and the AUCs and all of those people. It's not only on technology, but technology is definitely the place where misfits have the most acceptance and have been welcomed to build things that we are using every day. A few days ago, I was reading the New York Times and says that electing Joe Biden is electing the new leader of the free world, right? And that's how we say it, so like, the president of America as the president of the free world, sort of. But if you think about who's the president of the world and you make a vote, probably will be Mark Zuckerberg, and he's not elected.
Oh, right.
And he's not elected, and he can stay there for 50 years if he wants to. And that's where it becomes interesting.
I find that incredibly scary, whether it is the Googles of the world or the Facebook.
Yeah.
I find it incredibly scary because exactly for what you said, they are not elected and they have so much power. Why am I supposed to celebrate them and feel confident and feel that I have more stability?
You don't have to celebrate them, and I actually think stability is overrated, like as a search. You know, I think that what people are dreading and what Gen Z is dreading for is actually change and transformation and progress, and that never works with stability. So we are in the middle of a period of time where demands are very different. When you hear government officials talking and when you hear people talking, it is very different. I personally think that Joe Biden is going to do a very good job and I agree with William, which is like bring in more young people and continue like sort of the Obama administration of including people who are different from just him. And that is amazing. But about like technology, this is something we have to learn to live with. The future of work has completely changed and will change in the future. The future of how we travel, how we connect together has completely changed, and we are just learning it now.
All right, Amira Yahyaoui, I'm going backward now. I'm going to Mina Al-Oraibi. Mina, tell me why, like, you know, at one point I was at a conference in Abu Dhabi and there was Eric Schmidt of Google, and after he told us what he knew, I said, "Oh my Lord, I'm you know, shaking in my boots here because I'm so scared." Like Google, G is for God, and I know it's a certain generation is you know, more accepting of this than others. Give me your thoughts on this. But also, I'm going to go back to the geopolitics of it. But also, tell me your thoughts as someone from Iraq and who also has watched what's going on in the Middle East. When Amira says that resistance has become like watching Netflix, like you resist, you sit down and you watch Netflix. Is this about laziness in this part of the region in particular, or is this something that you refute? Mina Al-Oraibi.
Thank you. I mean, the first point about technology, it's a reflection of the fragmentation of power. I don't think you can say that today Mark Zuckerberg or Eric Schmidt are representative of misfits or people who are outside the power structure. They're at the heart of the power structure. Power has just changed. And I get what you're saying, Raghida, about that fear in terms of, and there's this constant conversation about the private sector and the public sector, and the idea at the end of the day, companies, primarily their job is to make money. Yes, there are some good ethical companies that say we want to do more than that. At the end of the day, what's their raison d'etre? And their raison d'etre is to make sure that they're going to get the right money for their shareholders. Now that's changing. It's interesting to hear CEOs who say now, in order to hire the best talent, they have to show that as companies that they are more transparent and they do a better job. But still, at the end of the day, it is about the dividends that will come through. And I would say that it would be wrong to believe that just because there are people who are in the technology sector and other sectors have power, that somehow is not corruptible, or that would be better than the standard geopolitics of power. Unfortunately, power corrupts, and ultimate power ultimately corrupts. So it's how do you put in those checks and balances? On resistance,
resistance, yes, because that's important to me. I want to understand if there's laziness inbuilt in us, or is there a system that
true. You've had, come on, Raghida, in Beirut, in Lebanon, in Iraq, for the past year, there have been people out on the streets. In Iraq, over 700 people died going out and protesting. And you don't always also resist just in protesting. There are people resisting by sheer of rebuilding in the areas that were liberated from ISIS, again in Iraq, but also in Syria. People resisted extremism by rebuilding their lives, despite all the hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of dollars that were pledged. A lot of that money wasn't dispersed, and people had to resist and rebuild their own lives. So I disagree. Yes, there are, I think, in some areas where you're comfortable, you might see a path, but I actually think there's a fighting spirit that's really still out there across different generations. I don't think it's just a youth element, but it's what is the most effective way of bringing about change. And it's not always by disruption.
Raghida, I'm sorry, that's not my point. I was talking about COVID-19 resistance, not resistance in general.
No,
sorry, because obviously I'm an activist. Like I got tortured by the police for resisting. So that's not what I'm talking about.
You were tortured, and I remember that. And you are the daughter of a human rights activist. You are a human rights activist. So that's why I was just thinking what happened.
Talking about COVID-19.
Okay, very good. Glad you corrected them. But I like the idea though, because in Lebanon, I think we need more of a push. I think this applies to the resistance in Lebanon, mind you. This is probably why I took to it right away. So this is worth exploring at some point. Why is it that people go and they think it's a picnic and they celebrate it, and then when it's tough, they go home and watch Netflix? So, okay. Sir John, Scarlett, I am back to the geopolitics with you, unless you want to say something about this. But anyway, let me ask you, we'll stay with this. You spoke of China and the Biden administration's potential dealing with China. About the violations of human rights that probably will be big in the Biden administration's approach to China. How are they going to be able to really walk away from where the Trump administration has left the China policy when they are very strong on the issue of human rights, and we see what's happening on the issue of human rights, not only in Hong Kong, in the not concentration, but in the camps, let's call them. And in that case, do you feel that one is going a bit too fast, suggesting that there will be a major shift in the China policy during a Biden administration? John Scott.
Well, there are a number of points I'd like to make, actually, not just about China, but I'll just pick that up, what you just said, Rita. I think we haven't quite fully recognized, and that includes in the United States, the sheer scale of the challenge that's involved with managing and responding to China. It can't just be put in a particular section and dealt with as a particular issue. Oh, well, that's human rights, or that's territorial ambition, or whatever, or that's technological challenge. China continues to have a massively growing economy. On a number of measurements, it's already bigger than the United States economy, and it's heading, almost certainly that way. And that's including this year, of course, in the consequence of the pandemic, ironically. So the idea that somehow we can, the idea that serious thought is being given to decoupling from it, the more one thinks about it, it's just not realistic. However much it might appear to be a right response because of the human rights issues and Hong Kong and so on that you're highlighting, the reality is that it's no longer possible to make clean-cut decisions like that. And my point is there, as I don't want to go about it because there are many other important geopolitical issues to discuss. But my point is there that as of now, nobody has really defined a way forward on this. And yeah.
From a professional intelligence officer's point of view, as you described yourself, what would you, if you were to project what the Chinese intelligence would be thinking now in order to do better with the Biden administration, give me one or two leading thoughts they would be entertaining. Would they say, like I had somebody intelligence tell me that they are thinking that the best way is to have an envoy to deal with that US-China relationship rather than leave it only to the level of the summits between the two presidents. Is this the sort of small detail that they think about, or is there more of the strategy for the next 4 years or 8?
Well, they might think about that, but the reality of the power structure in China is that big decisions are taken at the top. And that, of course, is one of the fundamental problems there. That is only when in a big party system like that, everything goes up to the top, and so it's what the top people are told and how they're informed and how honest people are with them. That that is absolutely crucial. So the reality is that the tone will be at the top, and I think, I mean, I am guessing here, but I think almost certainly that in Beijing and the Chinese leadership, with some good reason, they're thinking they're doing quite well. Not just economically, but also diplomatically and politically.
Keep that hat on, the intelligence, the professional intelligence officer. And if you were sitting in Tehran and the changes are taking place, what would be the process of your thinking? And I'm going to go to you, Mina, after that, and then William, and then Amira on this very same issue. Let's just discuss the Biden administration from Tehran's point of view. Are they going, at least as you would expect it from your expertise, John Scarlett?
Okay, well, the key point is that they look to have survived the policy of maximum pressure. Everybody was, thinking about that and not certain whether they could survive it, but they almost certainly have. So they're going to feel in a strong position. And they're in a position to negotiate. So, and that's already the stance that they're taking, and that shouldn't be surprising now. Mina Al-Oraibi, I differ with John Scarlett because I don't think that they are ready to negotiate at all. The same, it's not like they have been ready before, but that even Biden's administration will have to have some sort of conditions or circumstances to go back to talking about the JCPOA. Oh yes, well that's what I'm sorry. I'll come in. That's what I mean by negotiating. They're going to be tough negotiators, but they're looking to get an advantageous result out of this developing situation. Of course, they're going to be tough.
All right, Mina Al-Oraibi, I mean, how could we have a new page in the US-Iranian relationship if the situation remains as follows? There is a mindset in Tehran that they are not going to let go of certain principles, including what they believe is their right for extraterritorial activities, paramilitary forces in your country and mine, and they don't want to negotiate a new JCPOA. They just would like the return to it. So, from your perspective, Mina Al-Oraibi, tell me what you think about this and how will it impact Iraq in particular?
The Iranians will want to negotiate, of course, on their terms and will want to appear to be tough, but they're in a bind. They're in a tough spot. The economic sanctions are really biting. They are in some part isolated, even though the Europeans and the Russians and the Chinese, are trying to keep abridge them, but they are largely isolated. So they will have to negotiate at some point. The question is, how does the Biden administration come towards these negotiations? Is it going to be, we need a quick win and we just want to differentiate ourselves from the Trump administration? So JCPOA first, and then we'll do a secondary track that includes the regional dynamics, which again was the Obama administration thinking that we can have them as separate tracks. Or will the Biden administration say, we've learned from the mistakes and the problems of the last few years, and we can't just say we're going to do this separately. We need confidence building measures. So what will the Iranians show? How will they put a hold on their proxies? How will they come back from some of the activities they're doing in Syria and Iraq? both are going to act as though they don't need to negotiate, the other one is weaker, but actually the Iranians are weaker at this point. And the repercussions of the killing of Qasem Soleimani are still felt. And the militias inside of Iraq, and to a certain extent also Hezbollah, are weaker today than they were a year ago or 4 years ago. So actually putting more pressure on those proxies and putting pressure outside of Iran on those elements that are backed by Iran is probably the way that the Americans will go to show that we're not just going to talk about the nuclear element, we are going to care about what the Iranians are doing inside these various countries. There are confidence building measures that people talk about, but frankly, they won't really amount to much unless those confidence building measures can be tangible on the ground. Rhetoric alone won't do it.
On Iraq, I want to push you on this, because you say that it must take, that the Biden administration, that is to say, it must take steps to support Iraq's sovereignty and push back against Iran and Turkey there. Explain yourself.
I think that both the Turks and the Iranians have strategic interests in Iraq that they feel that they are free to pursue. The Turks, of course, for them, the biggest element is the PKK presence, the Kurdish militant or separatist group that's inside of Iraq. And they want to not only take out the PKK, but show that they can flex their muscles inside of Iraq. Much bigger issue, of course, is Iran, because of the plethora of groups that the Iranians back, but also their day-to-day interference inside of Iraqi politics, but also the economy. Iran would not have been able to survive through these sanctions without its ability to milk Iraq at every single level. And so if the Americans are serious about limiting access to funds for the Iranians, they're going to have to support Iraqi bid to push back against corruption, but also really support the Iraqi army and support the Iraqi police in a way that they've talked about doing. They tried to train them on the side, but really give them that support that bolsters them up in order to not longer say the militias are the ones fighting ISIS, or the militias are the ones who are going to bring stability to the country. It has to be the main elements of the security forces.
William Richards, do these elements at all play in the consideration of Wall Street and your analysis of what's going to happen to the economy? I mean, okay, short of a war in which the United States would be involved, short of that, how much are these elements? Is it in our minds here that we matter and that, you know, that makes a difference? And secondly, do you think the Biden administration would just walk away from sanctions against Hezbollah, against Iran, against the Hashd al-Shabi? I don't know if they have, I guess, I think they also, in fact, even the Revolutionary Guards, they have put them at a certain category. The administration has been doing very interesting stuff when it came to sanctions and Magnitsky Act, Caesar's Act, etc. All of those things, William Richards, tell me what you think the Biden administration would do, and tell me how would it impact your own analysis of how does that impact the aspirations, economic aspirations, not only of the United States, but also the rest of the world, a little bit, yani tartushe, as they say in Arabic.
Well, there's no question at all that the Middle East is important to the United States and that will continue. There's absolutely no question about that. I don't know if the news reports were right about last week that President Trump considered an action against Iran, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were right. And any action in the Middle East is going to take oil prices substantially higher and have an implication for the stock market. I do want to mention two people here in the US that I am keeping my eye on. I'm sure Sir John knows both of them, but one is Michelle Flournoy, who's a possible candidate for Secretary of Defense, and very well known, very well respected on both sides of the aisle in Congress. And were she appointed to Secretary of Defense, I think that would be a great thing. And then a young man named Jake Sullivan in Washington, D.C., who I have met, and I would not be surprised if he played some role on the National Security Council.
Yeah, that's right.
Jake Sullivan, I know Jake Sullivan well, but about Michelle, was she not the advisor to Obama, who sort of stimulated the idea that there should be a pullout from Iraq? And Mina, help me out here, because that was a very bad decision, because it was already planned, but they did it in such a bad way that I thought it was a mistake, not a good policy. Isn't she the same person? And what would that mean if she comes as Secretary of Defense of the United States?
Well, I think she is. Sir John is probably better able than I to speak about that. I just will say she's extremely well respected. I have a feeling that former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis thought very highly of her, but I wouldn't want to speak for him.
Okay. Okay. Mina, you have nothing on what I said.
I was just going to say, it wasn't really just Michelle Flourney's decision. It was, I mean, this was a campaign promise that Barack Obama made. You know, we will end the war in Iraq. Like, you can just decide to end the war and everything.
No, about timing. I'm speaking about timing, Mina. The timing was very wrong. Anyway, let me go now to Amira Yahyaoui, and I want to speak about Tunisia and North Africa. Unless you want to say something first, and please.
Yeah, I want to say something about this. It's so funny because I actually texted Jake that I'm coming to this circle.
Now we know what Amira Yahyaoui is doing, texting Jake Sullivan to say, tell him to come on, tell him we would love him to be on.
I think I actually looking at one of his best friends should be on this. If you're here, Alex, hi. So, so I actually want to talk about this and a little bit from a provocative way. I think when the Biden administration will take power, the number one question they should ask themselves on day one is how not to lose in 4 years, and how to make sure that Trump doesn't come back in 4 years. And today in America, we are very international and we care about world policy. But today in America, like Iraq, Lebanon, Tunisia, is really not on the top 500 priorities for the American people. And somehow what is demanded, and Trump also won because he made it, we're making America great, whatever that means. But there is a focus on fix America, don't be like fixing the world. The only thing in my perspective that will give importance to the Middle East and to the external like factors and the past involvement of America in, you know, Tunisia, Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran is the stock market. It's a question of economy. How does that impact oil prices? And how much should we do to make oil prices go right? In Iran, I personally think it's going to be a logic of like doing the minimum and showing a difference with the Trump administration. So I think that the Middle East is going to lose the power, like the Saudi Arabia, the Dubai, etc., are going to lose the power they had with Trump to like balance it a little bit more with Iran. I think if I was American and I had to advise, I would be like, focus on fixing the internal problems to be able in 4 years to show that you've done something.
That's what they plan. I'm sure that's what they plan. But let me take you back to Tunisia and the power of the Muslim Brotherhood there. I mean, again, you have two. Anyway, don't want to take too much time making comparison between Iran and Turkey, who is sponsoring the project of the Muslim Brotherhood, particularly in our region, in the Arab geography, if you will. So you were very active. I remember when I visited there, and I remember actually this is where I noticed that the Googles of the world were very much interested in the Arab Spring, and you were part of the Arab Spring. At any rate, I don't want the history of it all. I just want to ask you, where is Tunisia now? Where do you see it going? You have Libya next door. You have the Muslim Brotherhood who are still entrenched in there. You have women who did make a difference, and then all of a sudden, they're still important. They're very strong still. What's going on? What do you see coming? Amira Yahyaoui.
what I see coming, so Tunisia, I mean, in the micro level, I would give it a 0 on 10, and on the macro level, I would give it a 10 on 10. We are a free country. We are a real democracy. This is incredible to live in the Middle East. Like, this is unheard of. It is a free country. Tunisia is a democracy. So that checked. Now, how is it? Yeah, old guard fighting, a complete disbelief in the political system. Let's wait and see. Less interest in what's going on from like the political elite. And it is what was expected. We are sort of wait mode until this generation moves and there's a new generation that takes over power, that is younger, more like economically focused. But today, you know, Islam is not, Islam is not a buzzword anymore in Tunisia. Like, you are not winning elections because you pray more than others. That's done. No one is buying into that anymore. In terms of like geopolitical level, COVID played a good role of that, unfortunately, which is like it's stabilized it. Nothing is happening really. We're just paying and Netflixing, right? So in the future, I see it that we have two choices. You have the choice of becoming one of those, you know, countries, European countries that went through like the Orange Revolution and then they are like just the meh democracies. And we have the chance of wake up and get back the country and make it what it should be, which is fixing the socioeconomic problem and not the religious problem in a country that is 99% Sunni.
Okay, just one quick word on Libya. Your tough neighborhood, you know, Libya
You don't feel it. In Tunisia, you don't feel it anymore. We had the problem a lot many years ago. You know, like Tunisia could have collapsed many years ago because of what was going on in Libya. Today, it is really anecdotal.
Interesting. Now, listen, I've got to give you everybody 2 minutes to conclude. So I have to keep that in mind before, you know, and be mindful of the 5 o'clock. So what I want to do now, actually, you know what, Amira Yahyaoui, I want to stay with you. Tell me, what are you doing? What do you do now? Yeah, what's Moss?
Yes, I think the future is built and will be run a lot by technology, and that women and people who are not just nerds who went to Stanford should own technology. I think that's a fight that we are sort of losing. Absolutely every single thing we are using and managing our life today has been built by a guy in Silicon Valley coming from Stanford, although I was a Stanford fellow. But today I decided to move to San Francisco, build a company. For those who, I mean, I'm sure William knows, but I'm backed by Sequoia Capital. And we are building a technology that makes people access their rights and opportunity. And what we are doing so today, in the past year, we helped 200,000 students go to college without taking on loans.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Good for you. I'm so proud that you're on our advisory board. So I'm going to just send people your way at Beirut Institute. Amira, sure. Advisory board. I'm going to go backward now. William Richards, is that notion that she's talking about, is this sustainable, or is this just a nice, you know, nice gig, as she likes to say, use the word gig?
It's totally sustainable, and she's backed by one of the great venture capital firms in America. And if you want to look at a public company here in the US that has completely disrupted banking, I'm sure she knows it, but look at Square, the stock symbol Square, and look at what they're doing to disrupt traditional banking. It's totally sustainable, and it's a huge opportunity.
Well, that's really wonderful. And Mina, take notes for you and I, so that if we have money to put it in the stock market, you raise my salary. Mina, please, I want, you know, I really want to give you the chance, everyone, to have your 2 full minutes. So here's what I think I will do. I will go back to the order we started in order to give you your 2 full minutes of, because this is such a rich conversation and I don't know where to focus from here. So I'll leave each one of you to focus in the way that you wish to. John Scarlett, you have 2 minutes to tell me what I should learn from you today and think about tomorrow.
Right. Well, I'll pick up some of the very interesting points that are being made here. I think well, first of all, the first point I'd like to make is that we're being optimistic about the election and what the future might hold and so on. I just flag up the fact, and I'm naturally an optimistic person, but just flag up the fact that President Trump won, the second most votes of any presidential candidate and the most of any Republican candidate. And there's a big message there. And for the world outside, when everybody's looking at the United States, they're thinking of that. And it's adding, or it's continuing, if you like, the uncertainty and the sense of disorientation which is out there. That's very strong in Europe. It's more complicated in the authoritarian states, Russia and China and so on, for some of the reasons I touched on, but we need to talk about that more. That's the first thing. The second thing is that our experiences, not just in the US, I'd say, but this discussion is throwing it up. And technology, of course, is a very dynamic factor in this. Our political structures, our constitutional structures, our sort of liberal democracy structures are under test. And that's, I mean, just look at the US system. I mean, people say to us, gosh, it's 18th century creation with the Electoral College. How do you explain and justify that? But then in the UK, we have a parliamentary structure, which is 18th century as well. And has elected leaders and so on, which are not haven't really had a clear popular mandate and support, and this is now causing a great deal of uncertainty and confusion. And you can see different versions of that. Let's say in France, where there's been continual unease and continual unrest, and Italy and so on. We can go on like that. But liberal democracies, which in some ways are so resilient and are the basis of our political action, they're under test. And there's a lot of work to be done to get that right. Final point on that. And it comes back to the sort of technology point, if you like. When I see the arguments between the state representatives and security and intelligence representatives and the tech companies, for example, with a famous phrase from Tim Cook on everybody has a absolute right to privacy. You name me any society anywhere in the world where that has been true. A self-serving statement of principle, if ever I heard one, and it goes to the core of the problems we face. I'll end there.
Is intelligence going to be more or less sharpened because of this technology? One quick word, John Scarlett.
It's going to be more confused. And it's going to confuse decision making in a big way. It already is.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's too bad. I'm not feeling comfortable about all of this. I need to think it over. So John Scarlett, thank you so much for joining us. Stay with us. Don't go, please. Mina Al-Oraibi, you have 2 minutes to you.
Thank you, Raghida. I'd pick up by saying COVID-19, while it seems obvious, really did change everything. Things that we thought were impossible, airports closing down, commercial airlines stopping, everybody working from home. I produced a newspaper with the entire newsroom sitting at home. All the things that we thought were impossible kind of happened, and some were terrible. People have lost loved ones, and I think the trauma of that on societies all over the world will be playing out for quite some time. And the isolation and the impact that's had on people generally and on mental health. But on the flip side, there are silver linings. We've leapfrogged certain things. There are old ways of doing things that we knew we had to change, but we felt like we could never change it, have now changed. But the other thing that COVID-19 really showed is legitimacy by competence. And I've always spoken about this idea of legitimacy by competence. You cannot just claim legitimacy through the ballot box if you're not competent, if you don't actually deliver. Now, for a while, We thought that that would be self-evident, and as you're all referring to, President Donald Trump was able to get 74 million votes, and yet for some people they actually think he's competent because on delivering on certain issues that they care about. But on other issues, they've actually really failed. So this idea of competence is going to be really important, and how countries and cities and healthcare systems and systems largely will be measured. And then the final thing I'd say is another anniversary this year. Again, the historian in me, 75 years since the establishment of the UN. This year, this September was going to be the big Anga. There was going to be a real revision of the multilateral system. COVID happened. I don't think anyone paid attention to anything that happened virtually at the UN. But this is a moment where really it is an inflection point to what William was saying later. I think it's an inflection point also on how the international system works. Will we be able to get travel corridors that actually work? Will we get vaccines that people recognize and you can actually travel normally again, but also work collaboratively? The challenge is huge, and I'm not really sure that our political systems are set up right for it.
Mina Al-Oraibi, fantastic having you. Stay with me and give my warm hugs to Abu Dhabi and to Baghdad if you ever go back shortly. But I've never been to Baghdad, by the way. I've been to Erbil only, but Abu Dhabi, of course, is a home for the Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. So thank you very much, Mina Al-Oraibi. Stay with me. Amira Yahyaoui, 2 minutes to you. Leave me dazzled, yalla.
Thank you, my dear. I think, I joined Mina, which is COVID-19 is going to change something fundamental in the human race and will impact generations to come. It is going to impact how we work. Many companies, as you know, now work remote. Look at Mina. This couldn't even be imaginable. It is going to impact how we move, even if it opens back. But it's also going to impact something that I think will be the biggest impact we will be living with, which is mental health.
Yeah.
The mental health of those who are alone, the mental health of those who are subject to mental health, but the mental health of a whole generation and those kids who are living with confinement, with fear, with germophobic, without connection. The mental health of those kids who are growing up seeing their families not hug, seeing a very small section of the people they are supposed to interact with. And I think this is where we will have to really think about what does it mean, the new normal? How can we speedily get against that? The other thing that I am very interested with is this COVID-19 today. There are 2 vaccines that got over 90% success rate. Both of them, the whole team is immigrants. Turkish immigrants in Germany at Bionet, and Moderna the same, including the chief medical officer. And I think us, especially those who are not from the white world, this is something we need to build on to show that, yes, it's important that you open borders and give a chance because opportunity is not everywhere, but smartness and IQ is actually everywhere.
I'll speak up for my university there, Oxford. Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed. Now, that left you, William Richards, 1 minute only. Sorry about that, but Amira took your 1 minute. Go ahead, please. Sorry, I would apologize.
Oh, I'm happy, and I'll do it in 1 minute. I had a relative who stood with George Washington at Valley Forge. This country has been divided many, 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 many times in history, but I stood in the snow in a little village north of New York for 50 minutes to vote and watch people in the little town where we turned out to vote, watch families vote, and watched Americans vote because they care about this country. If you're an investor or you're starting a company, I personally think if we do this call in four years, you'll be massively surprised by what happens here in the US in those 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William Richards, and everyone. Thank you for joining me. What a pleasure, and what food for thought. And I'm grateful to all four of you. And my guests for next week are going to be Elliot Abrams, Special Representative for Iran and Venezuela at the US State Department. He serves as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor in the George W. Bush administration. We have Ambassador Dorothy Shea. She is the US Ambassador to Lebanon. She was the former Deputy Chief of Mission at the US Embassy in Cairo. We have MP, Member of the Parliament, Fouad Makhzoumi, founder of the National Dialogue Party in Lebanon, and he's Chairman and CEO of the Future Pipe Industries. And then we have Gourvan Lebras. He is the Deputy Director of the Center for Analysis, Planning and Strategy in the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. And he was the former press secretary at the French Embassy in Tunisia. That one is for you. Thank you so much. You honor me, you enlighten me, you leave me elated. Have a wonderful afternoon, day, evening, wherever you are, and goodbye for now. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Raghida.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.